Hi guys. I wanted to go over a few more examples with you on 6.2 day 2 because I realized I didn't really do any of the reciprocal trig functions, and I wanted to make sure that you saw a couple of those as well. So let me just start off with a normal one first. So what if they asked you to find the, I should have put that, find the exact value, right? So all of these are asking you a trig function of an angle. So all of the answers should be a ratio because angles go in and ratios come out. So if I asked you, what's the cosine of negative 3 pi over 2? Well, where does that angle land? It's a negative angle, so you have to rotate counterclockwise. Negative 3 pi over 2, that's negative 3 pi over 2, that's negative 3 90-degree angles. So there's 190, 290, 3. Your negative 3 90-degree angles lands right there. What point is that on the unit circle 1 unit up? That's the point 0, 1. They're asking you for the cosine of that angle. So it is equal to the x-coordinate at that point, which is 0. So the answer to that is a ratio of 0. Okay? What about... All right, here come the reciprocals. Just remember, the reciprocals are just the answer, whatever the original trig function was. Like if this is secant, if you did this as cosine 5 pi over 4, just reciprocate that answer. It's the ratio, but the reciprocal of him. So if they ask you what's the secant of 5 pi over 4, well, where does 5 pi over 4 land? Let's get our anchors. We're working with pi's over 4, right? So this is pi, and this is 2 pi, right? Halfway around is pi, all the way around is 2 pi. So in the worlds of pi over 4, this is 4 pi over 4, and then this is 8 pi over 4. So if I'm looking for 5 pi's over 4, 5 pi's over 4 will be in the quadrant right after 4 pi's over 4. So 5 pi's over 4 land right there. So what's your reference angle between 5 pi over 4 and 4 pi over 4? 1 pi over 4. So what you're really being asked to find is the secant of a pi over 4 that landed in quadrant 3. Well, what is the secant of pi over 4 radians? Well, that's 45 degrees. So what is the secant of 45 degrees? Well, if you come over to your triangle or go to your unit circle, 45 degrees, I'll work off of this one. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So if we were doing cosine, I would do a over h, 1 over root 2. But I'm doing secant, so the reciprocal is h over a. So root 2 over 1 is root 2. So the answer is root 2, but now you have to figure out if it's positive or negative. Well, the angle landed in quadrant 3. So what is the secant of an angle in quadrant 3? Well, it does the same thing as cosine, his reciprocal. So all students take, only the sine function gets you a positive ratio for an angle that lands in quadrant 3. That means the cosine and the secant get you a negative ratio. Because think about it. The cosine would have been a negative x-coordinate for an angle in quadrant 3. So the secant is his reciprocal. The reciprocal of a negative is still negative. So they just follow the same positive and negative signs as the original trig functions. All students take calculus also apply it to their reciprocals. So that would be a negative ratio. So the answer is negative root 2. All right, what about this one? What if they asked you the cotangent of pi over 2 radians? Well, pi over 2 is 180 divided by 2. That's 90. So that is a 90-degree angle. So that means it lands right there. What point is that on your unit circle? 0, 1. Well, they asked for the cotangent. Remember, tangent would have been y over x. So cotangent is the reciprocal x over y. So x 0 over y1, 0 over 1, that's 0. So the answer there is 0. All right, what if they asked you, what is the cosecant of pi radians? So where does pi radians land? Well, that's an easy one. He's one of our anchors. Pi radians is 180 degrees. That's halfway around the circle, right? So pi radians lands right there. What ordered pair is that on the unit circle? It's to the left one. So that's the ordered pair negative 1, 0. Well, if they were asking you the sine of pi is the y-coordinate 0. So the cosecant of pi is the reciprocal of that y-coordinate. And if you think of 0 as 0 over 1, because you can put any number over 1. The reciprocal of that is 1 over 0, which is undefined. So that's an undefined ratio. Pi is an angle that is not in the cosecant's domain, and you'll learn about that in section 3. So that's an undefined. So some answers will be the word undefined. especially when you're working with zeros that have to be flipped over, or x coordinates over y coordinates, or y coordinates over x coordinates when you're working with a coordinate of 0. All right, what about the secant of 3 pi? Well, where do 3 pi radians land? Well, remember your anchors. This is pi halfway around, and this is 2 pi all the way around. So I've gone all the way around, and I've got 2 pi radians. I have to go one more halfway for another pi radians, so this is also 3 pi. So 3 pi radians lands in the same spot as pi. So what point is that? -1, 0, right? 1 to the left. So secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So the cosine of 3 pi radians would have been the x coordinate. So the secant is the reciprocal of that x coordinate. And what's the reciprocal of -1? -1. So the answer is -1. All right. What about the cosecant of 8 pi over 3 radians? Well, where does 8 pi over 3 radians land? Let's get our anchors. This is pi radians here, halfway around, and then 2 pi radians gets us all the way around. So in the world of pi's over 3, this is 3 pi's over 3, and this is 6 pi's over 3. Well, I'm looking for 8, so I got to keep going. So every 3 pi's over 3 gets me halfway around. So if I go, right now I've done this, right? I've gone all the way around. I'm at 6 pi's over 3. So if I go another halfway, that gets me another 3 pi's over 3. So that would be where 9 pi's over 3 land. But I don't want to go all the way. So the 8th pi over 3 lands in the quadrant right before 9 pi's over 3. So this is where 8 pi's over 3 land. So who's your reference angle between 8 pi over 3 and 9 pi over 3? 1 pi over 3. So what you're really finding is the cosecant of a pi over 3 that landed in quadrant 2. All right, so what is the cosecant of pi over 3? What's the cosecant of a 60-degree angle? Well, if you go to your triangle, because I like to use my triangle, if you go to a 60, right, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So the sine of a 60 would have been O over H, root 3 over 2. But we need his reciprocal, cosecant, which is H over O. So I need 2 over root 3. So that would be 2 over root 3, but I got to clean that up. So if I times by root 3, I get 2 root 3 over 3. But now I need my sine. I'm taking the cosecant. What is the cosecant of an angle that landed in quadrant 2? Is it positive or negative? Well, according to All Students Take Calculus, student says that the sine of any angle in quadrant 2 gets you a positive ratio. So since the cosecant is his reciprocal, he also gets you a positive ratio in quadrant 2. So that should be positive. And think about it. The sine of any angle is represented by the y-coordinate. So the y-coordinate is positive in quadrant 2, and therefore the reciprocal of that y-coordinate, his cosecant, would also be positive. So the answer is positive 2 root 3 over 3. All right, what about this one? The cotangent of 5 pi over 3 radians. Well, where does 5 pi over 3 land? Well, let's get our anchors. Halfway around is pi, all the way around is 2 pi. In the worlds of pi over 3, that's 3 pi's over 3, and then that's 6 pi's over 3. So if I start rotating, that's 3 pi's over 3, but I'm trying to get 5 pi's over 3. So I'm going to keep going. I don't want to go all the way because I don't want 6 pi's over 3, I want 5. So 5 pi's over 3 land in the quadrant right before 6 pi's over 3. So who's your reference angle between 6 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3? 1 pi over 3. So what you're really finding is the cotangent of a pi over 3 that landed in quadrant 4. What is the cotangent of pi over 3? What is the cotangent of 60 degrees? Well, if you go to your chart, the tangent of a 60 would have been O over A root 3. But I want the cotangent, his reciprocal, A over O. So that would have been 1 over root 3. So 1 over root 3, clean it up, you get root 3 over 3. And now I got to figure out if it's positive or negative. Well, according to All Students Take Calculus, only the cosine of an angle gets you a positive ratio in quadrant 4. So the cotangent, which is the reciprocal of tangent, so he'll do whatever tangent does, that would be a negative ratio. So that means that his ratio is negative also. Because again, you'd be dealing with a positive x coordinate and a negative y coordinate. Cotangent would be x over y. A positive x over a negative y coordinate will be a negative ratio. So that is negative root 3 over 3. Okay, that should be the end. Sorry about that. I wanted to make sure that I talked about those reciprocals.